When a global superpower shifts its focus from confrontation to strategy, the world doesn't shake overnight, but it rumbles silently beneath our feet. And China has been rumbling. While America debated politics and personality, while headlines revolved around tweets and tariffs, something far more consequential was quietly taking shape, a challenge not to Trump himself, but to the very foundation of American global power, the dollar. The US dollar has long been more than just currency. It has been a symbol of dominance, a tool of influence, and in many cases, a weapon of control. But now, for the first time in modern history, a credible alternative is being assembled in full view. What China just exposed isn't merely a financial strategy, it's a deep vulnerability within the American system. And ironically, many of the policies championed by Donald Trump, intended to make America stronger, have, in some ways, accelerated its exposure to this growing economic rebellion. This isn't just about money. It's about trust, about credibility, about the architecture of global influence. As China unrolls its digital currency, builds alliances through infrastructure deals, and pushes for trade in anything but the dollar, the message is clear: the monopoly is over. And if America doesn't recognize this quiet war of influence, it may wake up one day no longer leading it. So what exactly has China revealed? Why does it strike at the heart of Trump's economic legacy? And more importantly, what comes next? Let's break this down. One of the most significant revelations from China's recent economic maneuvers is the deliberate push to de-dollarize global trade. This isn't just a technical adjustment, it's a strategic recalibration that strikes at the heart of US financial supremacy. For decades, the US dollar has served not only as the world's primary reserve currency, but also as the mechanism through which America has exerted silent power over other nations. Sanctions, trade control, and investment flows, all these tools have been effective precisely because they operate within a dollar-dominated system. But China's move toward creating trade partnerships that bypass the dollar isn't an act of rebellion, it's a signal of shifting trust. Think of the global economy as a network of relationships, and the dollar as the language through which those relationships are negotiated. When countries like Russia, Iran, Brazil, and even some US allies begin to speak a different financial language, trading in yuan, gold, or bilateral currencies, it's not just a matter of convenience. It's a vote of no confidence in the US-led order, and that should make us pause. Because it suggests that power is no longer concentrated in one center, but is being redistributed through a more multipolar lens. China isn't just exposing a financial weakness, it's quietly teaching the world how to operate outside the American orbit. This is not merely economics, it's a psychological signal to the world that the American promise of stability is no longer unquestionable. Trump's rhetoric about America first may have played well to a domestic audience, but globally, it created a perception that the US was retreating from its responsibilities as a stable steward of international norms. That perception, combined with mounting US debt, inflation, and political division, has made the dollar feel less like a safe haven and more like a risky bet. When trust erodes, systems unravel. And this is what China understands so profoundly. They're not attacking the dollar with bombs or propaganda. They're undermining it by offering alternatives, and those alternatives are gaining traction because they seem less politically volatile and more grounded in long-term planning. The truth is, global power is not just maintained through strength, it is sustained through credibility. Once credibility fades, even the strongest empires can find themselves negotiating from a position of weakness. That is the quiet truth China has now revealed. Another element that China has masterfully brought to light is the illusion of American economic invulnerability. For decades, the United States has operated under the assumption that its economy is untouchable, too big to fail, too central to the world to be questioned. But illusions are dangerous, particularly when they're self-imposed. What China has exposed is not a sudden crack in the system, but a long-ignored fragility, a system built on unsustainable debt, short-term thinking, and the arrogance of assumed permanence. When a nation accumulates trillions in debt and relies on consumerism and speculation, rather than production and infrastructure, it builds a house of cards. China, by contrast, has been playing the long game. investing in energy independence, technological ecosystems, infrastructure development, and supply chain dominance. They've understood that true economic power is not about how loudly you boast, but how quietly you build. And that's exactly what they've been doing while the U.S. has become entangled in political theater, short election cycles, and internal polarization. This contrast isn't just economic, it's philosophical. The American system has increasingly favored instant gratification. Growth must be quarter by quarter. Success must be visible and loud. But China's approach has been deeply Confucian. Patient, calculated, focused on long-term harmony and resilience. And now, as the cracks in the American economy become harder to ignore, the difference in outcomes is stark. What's more revealing is that many within the U.S. still refuse to acknowledge this shift. There's a collective denial, a belief that no matter what, the U.S. will bounce back simply because it always has. But history doesn't work that way. Civilizations decline not because of a single catastrophe, but because they fail to adapt to new realities. China hasn't destroyed the American economy. They've simply moved around it, exposed its weaknesses, and demonstrated what focus and strategic discipline can achieve. And that's the hard truth. Resilience is not a guarantee. It's earned. It's cultivated. And if we continue to treat economic dominance as an entitlement rather than a responsibility, then we shouldn't be surprised when others surpass us, not through force, but through foresight. The world doesn't wait for you to catch up. It moves on. And now we arrive at one of the most quietly devastating exposures China has delivered, not to America's economy directly, but to the myth of Western control over global supply chains. For decades, the West, particularly the United States, operated under the assumption that globalization would always function on its terms. It was believed that manufacturing could be outsourced without consequence, that control could be maintained without ownership, and that critical resources could be secured without real investment in production. China didn't confront this belief head-on. They simply built something better while no one was looking. What China has revealed is how vulnerable the U.S. has become to its own strategy of convenience. By placing short-term profit over long-term sovereignty, America willingly handed over the keys to entire sectors of its economy. Rare earth minerals, semiconductors, pharmaceuticals, electronics, China either dominates or plays a critical role in nearly every one. That's not an accident, it's design. It's the result of decades of policy, planning, and patience. And now, the United States finds itself in the ironic position of being the world's largest economy, yet unable to independently produce many of the technologies and materials it relies on most. This exposure isn't just economic, it's existential, because it reveals something deeper about Western assumptions that efficiency and outsourcing are always strengths. But what happens when the supplier has different interests? What happens when geopolitical tensions rise? Suddenly, supply chains become leverage. And leverage, once in the hands of your strategic competitor, becomes a weapon far more precise and damaging than any missile. This is what China has exposed, that in an era of global instability, supply chain dependence is not just a business issue, it's a national security risk. And while the U.S. is now scrambling to rebuild domestic manufacturing, to reach shore indices it once exported gleefully, it's doing so late and at enormous cost. So here's the lesson. Real power lies in the ability to sustain yourself, not just economically, but strategically. If you don't own your own foundation, someone else will. And once they do, they won't need to confront you with force. They'll simply wait for the moment you need something only they can provide. That's not war. That's checkmate. By creating alternative financial systems, such as the cross-border interbank payment system CIPS, China is challenging the monopoly of sub-FT. By signing trade deals in yuan with countries increasingly frustrated by U.S. oversight, it is building a parallel reality where the dollar is no longer the only trusted gatekeeper. And most importantly, by accumulating gold and quietly divesting from U.S. treasuries, China is signaling that it sees a future where trust is no longer automatically given to the American financial empire. Now, this doesn't mean the dollar will collapse tomorrow, but it does mean something even more dangerous: the erosion of belief. Because currencies don't function on force, they function on faith. And once that faith begins to weaken, you can't get it back with interest rates or press conferences. You get it back by being who you say you are. That's the real exposure. Not just that the U.S. is vulnerable, but that the story it's told the world about stability, fairness, and trust is beginning to ring hollow to the very partners who once needed no convincing. China has laid bare a hard truth: if power is wielded without wisdom, eventually people will seek alternatives. And if leadership becomes synonymous with control rather than service, the system begins to fracture. This isn't just a financial shift, it's a philosophical one. A reckoning with how trust is built and how easily it can be lost when institutions become arrogant and complacent. And that's the deepest lesson of all. In a world where power is no longer about who shouts the loudest, but about who people trust when things get quiet, the loudest empire may find itself suddenly unheard.